when I saw it online, and I was like, okay, this is something that we all need to understand a little more. So thank you so much, Saba, first of all, for coming. So I think let's start off with the heading, because that's something I was confused about. Why 100 years a jackal? So that's something I would love for you to kind of explore, and then let's start off with talking about the pieces.
Okay. So the 100 years a jackal is from one of the sayings of Tipu Sultan. And I think what I'm loving about this audience is that almost everyone knows who Tipu Sultan is. I don't have to explain the relevance, the significance, its historic, where he was from. I don't need to explain to most of the people here. And I'm assuming that there's a lot of understanding of who he was and what he did and what he meant to the British. And we'll talk about that in more detail. लेकिन उसकी एक saying थी, he used to say, he had a famous quote from him that it's better to live one day as a lion. In Urdu, in Hindustan, sher is lion and tiger both, right? So it's better to live one day a lion than 100 years a jackal. And a jackal in Urdu is gidar. And I really started to think, gidar, what's the characteristics of a gidar, you know? And I really started to brainstorm about how, and of course our own ex-prime minister also used to mention a lot of the gidar and kahan pe bahut sari sayings bhi hain uske bare mein. So I thought that, you know, rather than focusing on anything else, just focus on the jackal. And I want you to think about this towards the end of the talk and the end of the exhibit, ke jackal kaun hai in this narrative? Who is the jackal? Who is the jackal?
Project as much as you can.
Okay, who is the jackal in this artwork? Who is the jackal in our current political scenario? Who was the jackal historically? And there have been a lot of interesting debates that I've had with my fellow artists in the last few weeks about who the jackal is or was.
Thank you so much. I think that puts a lot of things into perspective, and I think as we kind of explore the talk and your work a little more, there's so many answers because there's so many different interpretations we'll all have from that heading. So I think the themes that I kind of mapped out in my head, maybe you all have also, is ek to I feel ke you can get a sense of Orientalism, as in the critique of it, which is how problematic it is, the way that the West kind of perceives the East. This was a term that was coined by Edward Said in 1978, where he said, you know, that fantasizing the East kind of came from colonialism. Then we saw it a lot through the media, like Aladdin is something we all watched. What were the things they were trying to project about it? Same with Pocahontas, like us as kids, and then we kind of accepted it, the way that Hollywood kind of does project it. Then we see this through art, we see this through museums, we see this through Armani just produced a new line of clothes that are shalwar kameez inspired. You know, go check it out, it's quite interesting. So why is it that when the East does it, it's problematic, when the West does it, it's glorified? So this narrative is something that I really see through your work. So I think let's start with that theme, with how Chashme Badur and Pharrell Williams, Tiffany and Co., their lack of, you know, accepting and kind of like giving credit for it.
Absolutely, thank you. I think this is an interesting point where Fatma joins the conversation as well, because Fatma has been a friend / inspiration, and I'm much more busier than her because my children are at a younger age group, but so she knows that, so she keeps forwarding me all these inspiring things. She's like, look at this should infuriate you. So one day she sent me this image of a pair of glasses with real emeralds and diamonds on the frame that were up on auction on Sotheby's, and they're called the Astana-e-Firdaus, and they were from the collection of Shah Jahan. And but you would say, what is infuriating about this pair? I mean, ऐनक है, it's on sale, good, कोई पैसे बनाएगा. But the infuriating aspect of this was that we had not seen it before. ये हमारे ही subcontinent की object था. We had not accessed it before. And the person who was wearing it was a Scottish historian based in India. And
so that happened later. What really infuriated me was that there was this young assistant from Sotheby's.
Yeah.
She put her selfie on Instagram saying, okay, so which celebrity do you think is going to look good in these?
Oh, wow.
And that just... the lid was off, and then I had to call Saba immediately.
I'm so glad you did.
Yeah, I'm so glad she did. And then I said that why should I make my own pair? What will I be doing by copying that pair? I think the connection that Fatma made with the Astana-e-Firdaus, the original pair, was the green. And I use that green a lot in my resin objects that I make in my practice. So that must have triggered a
Yeah.
connection. And she said, how can we own this piece again? So I said, I want to recreate this piece. Yes, you're right. And I want to embed in the lens something very specific to our condition. And the pair is actually on display on the plinth on the right. So what I did, I embedded images of the partition. And I wanted कि जब इसको कोई पहने, whoever looks at them or through them or holds them, they don't just see the grandeur of the subcontinent. They don't just see कि wow, Taj Mahal, Peacock Throne, the Mughals. They see that what was the outcome of colonialism in our region. And the drawings that are in the lens are pencil drawings, really finely drawn, of refugees crossing the border. Some people ask me, India se Pakistan ja rahe, Pakistan India. I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's that gap between the two where a lot of people lost too much.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think there's so many larger conversations I want to have regarding this piece and this theme, but I think we'll come to that towards the end. I just want to cover all your pieces. So from this, that lens, all of that, I see how you bring repatriation.
Repatriation, yeah?
Yeah, repatriation from your art piece, which is the biggest one here today. It's called Repatriation of Tipu's Tiger.
Right.
So for those of you who might not be aware, Tipu's Tiger is a very famous structure that's always kind of been there in Victoria and Albert Museum right now. I mean, there's a history to it.
Yeah, Madhu Singh, be a little louder.
Okay, yeah. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, okay. So is piece mein we see Saba kind of sending it back home. So let's hear more about that.
Okay. This conversation about Tipu's tiger, just to give you a bit of a background about Tipu's tiger. Tipu's tiger is an object at the V&A, at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And those of you who have traveled there and visited the museum, it's their most popular object on display in their India gallery. It's in a gallery in the same space as Ranjit Singh's throne. It's a large automaton organ, and when you open it, it has keys to play it, and there's a crank which, if you turn, it makes a roaring sound. We have never seen that. We have never accessed that. Yeah, but the arm of the soldier goes up and down. It's wooden. It's exquisite, and it is part of their collection. Yeah. So, for Fatma, if you want to add something about that object, yeah.
Yeah, well, again, I think it's very interesting when you look at that object, because what the museum says about it. You see, because when objects are taken out of context and they're placed behind a glass wall in a museum, the museum curator suddenly has power over what they say about that object to you. And that kind of becomes your source document to relate to that object and nothing else, because you don't know the context. And I mean, you know what I mean also, because we see that in museums all the time. And what this object says is a tiger a tiger mauling a European soldier, and it's not a European soldier. It's very clearly a British soldier. It's not French. It's not German. It's exactly the way the British troops dressed, because if you look at all the painting references, this is what it is. And so again, that was another revelation that Saba made. Because we all wondered, okay, he could not have ordered this toy to be made in the 18th century. Where did this come from? Who would have had the technology to actually make this? Because it's a wind-up toy, and it's musical, like a musical box, and with a little figure moving. And I mean, it's quite a feat, engineering feat to have accomplished, and it's huge. It's not very small either. Saba.
Yeah, and it was made by the French, and either they was commissioned by Tipu Sultan, or it was gifted by the French embassy, because the French were allies with Tipu Sultan at that time. And when the Fourth Mysore Anglo War took place and Tipu was killed, the palace was looted. So his capital was Sringapatna, and it's an island surrounded by Kaveri River. So when the palace there was looted, they took everything from there, including the Imam Zaman on Tipu Sultan's arm, his puggar, his weapons,
Pajama.
his pajama, and his this entire palace was looted. His war tent, which is an exquisite war tent with block printing on it, that was taken, and they found this in his Rang Mahal, this object. And they said, oh, look, you know, what a terrorist he was. Look at his jihadi mindset. He just wanted all the Goras to be killed. And this is a trophy we need to take back. And we will not allow the auction of any of these objects in Mysore, because there was a danger that these objects might become, might instigate further rebellion, or people might hold on to them as you know, they might become dangerous contact relics, which are very powerful as well. So instead, they very conveniently took them back to London, dono haath se loota, and took it back to London. And they were, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Robert Clive, also known as Clive of India. His daughter and his son was then the governor of Madras, and his wife also came to do this tour of the spoils, and they took things with both hands back to London. This particular story of this piece, I'll stick to that, was taken to the East India Company's head office, and placed on display. And it was kept without any covering, without any, and children would come and just turn the crank and get very amused by it, and they say, see, this object is a great evidence that the man who we killed because he was the biggest threat to not only the British but to the Indian people themselves, almost like the big boogeyman of the East was what they turned Tipu Sultan into, is the threat. This is the kind of toys he played with. You know, look at what a big threat he was. And since then, for 223 years, this object has been at the Victoria Albert Museum. So what happened was, in July, I was in a program with the Paul Mellon Center for British Arts. It's a program with Yale, and I was a scholar for the fellow with them, and they took us on a very private tour of the Victoria Albert Museum, and the curator of the museum invited us very innocently to ask us that we want to decolonize, we want to change the labels to make them more to acknowledge the provenance. So what do you think, what do you think we should write in place of what Fatma just mentioned? It says that Tipu was killed, and hence we got this object, as he died of malaria or whatever, right? So I said, nothing, you need to give it back. And they said, no, you see, we can't give it back because the current government is BJP, and there is a very strong anti-Muslim sentiment, and they're going to just chop it into pieces, and that'll be the end of it. I said, let it chop into pieces. That's its narrative, that's its relevance. And if you can't send it back, you need to put it away, because it's offensive and it is creating a visceral reaction in me. It's right next to
ironically,
Ranjit Singh's throne. I mean, come on, put two and two together. What are we glorifying here? There's only violence. And then somebody in our group said, this is a very popular object. Children love the tiger, and maybe we should focus on changing the way it's displayed to make it more accessible to children.
Oh God.
So I said, I'm sorry, but that is further offensive, because it'll turn into the tiger who came to tea.
Yes.
Which is a very popular British storybook that we all tell our small children. I said, this is not the tiger who came to tea.
Thank you.
And this is a very, very painful part of our past.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for us to look beyond that. So you need to give it back. So what I decided, Laraib, was that my medium, I'm not an NGO, I'm not a political actor, my medium is drawing. I'm a studio artist. I draw, my medium is pencil. I decided to send it back through my drawings. So I titled this piece The Repatriation of Tipu's Tiger, and I sent it back to Sringapatna's palace. I identified a palace where they have currently a replica of this Tipu's tiger placed. I consider that like a bit of they've kept it in place for the original one to show up, maybe one day. तो उसकी replica बनाई हुई है. तो I say कि इसको हटा के you should put it back. but I think it opens up a really important back and forth with museums that, yeah, but you can't take care of your things, you know, kharab kar doge. So you will ruin it. You don't know how to preserve your own things. Is something that.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the journey that you take
Yeah.
in taking it back? Because I think that's very interesting and what inspired that journey.
Okay, so if you see my wider practice, I do routes. My focus is on mapping routes. I look at two destinations, a starting point and an ending point, and I draw the route village by village, picking on different monuments. And of course, every map is biased, right? And this is when I make my own map, I choose which Imam Bargah to elevate, which church to highlight, which temple to put in the forefront, which bridge to emphasize. And I have worked extensively on the Grand Trunk Road as well as the CPEC. I get excited by routes. I get excited by economic corridors and religious corridors. I worked on Kartarpur, I worked on the Sharda Peeth. I manifest these openings. So for this drawing, I was looking at, I'm like, how do I send Tipu's tiger back to Mysore? So I looked up the current Raja of Mysore and I Instagrammed him. And I sort of like, hey, if we send you the tiger, would you put it in your palace? But that was very naive of me. I didn't realize that the Wodeyars had a very, very bloody relationship with the Sultan, and this was the beginning of my research. So he left me on scene. But then I came across a really interesting book, and I really recommend it. It's a very easy read. It's called Birds of Passage, and it's the journey it's diary entries of Henrietta Clive, who was the Bahu of the Robert Clive, Edward Clive's wife, the Clive of India's Bahu. And she, in her 40s, goes to South India, and she waits in Chennai, which was then Madras, because her husband is the Governor General there. She waits there for Tipu to be killed so she can begin a grand tour of South India. So in doing so, her diary journal entries are about the war is dragging, it's very boring here, the heat is oppressive, my girls are wilting. And then the author who has written this book, who's compiled this diary from letters from the Powers Castle, I forget her name, I'm sorry, but she really sort of praises that, well done to this woman. In 1789, she did this. But let's not forget, she did this with 750 persons, with 3 or 4 elephants, buffaloes, camels, bodyguards, army generals following her around. So what I started to do was I went through her biography, her letters, and I identified her route. And I took the tiger back following the same route that she took, imagining that must have been the route that was taken to transport the objects back to the port of Chennai.
Wow, that's incredible, because I was so intrigued by it and I wanted to ask you a little bit more in detail. Even the red, like what's the significance of that in the background? Like how does that kind of add on to the route? Or, what was your, why would you choose that color?
The pink is just more like an aesthetic decision that you take in your studio. It's called Sumanagashi ink. It's a marbling technique where you float inks on water and then you transfer dipping your paper on it. And I wanted to give it a warmer. I've worked in blue in the past. I wanted to give it a warmer. It's a bit dramatic, red is dramatic. Yeah. It's got the whole martyr, sacrifice, kind of a association to it.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. And coming back to then, I think the idea of identity also comes out a lot. That's something that I saw from both the pieces, and then also from especially the 1965 piece, where who are we? What are we celebrating? The fact that the curators at Victoria and Albert felt that they could belittle us. Or the fact that Pharrell Williams can take credit, intellectual credit for the classes. So why is that there? Why do they feel that is it our own sense of identity that kind of lets others dictate what we think of ourselves?
Uh, I don't know. I think yes. We have to look within first, and I think we all need to. Be, there's a line that I read somewhere where somebody's a character in a play is actually talking to a Jewish person after the Holocaust and asking the question, and making the observation that you live as if without a history. Okay, and I think that kind of really sort of brung home to me because I think that a lot of times we are unaware of the history, and which means an unbiased history, which means a fair account, which means an objective history, and it may not come from books. Because I think what people are finding, I mean, also, when somebody was doing research on, okay, what was the exact spot where Tipu Sultan passed away, and he went back to look at paintings. And it's in paintings that can sometimes give you a more, because they were done right after the event. So they give you a more accurate portrayal of what that event was, what this person was wearing. But otherwise you read an Englishman's account saying Tipu Sultan in all his finery. I mean, you have probably never seen a portrait or a painting of Tipu Sultan wearing anything but a white malmal jama like this, or the one with the striped print of a tiger skin. And what did they find? Why did they have to bring these objects back? Because there was no Instagram, and there is no camera, and there is no nothing. So what they brought back was his white jama from his private quarters. What they brought back was the Imam Zamin, which is this prayer of protection, which is encased in, and it's a pink fabric, and it was on his right arm, and which identified him. So there was no gold, and there was no diamonds, and there were no sort of glorious mohal jewels on him, on his person, or a jeweled, and of course his sword. And even now in England, if you actually go, I have seen a couple of objects in Windsor. I have seen some in the Army Museum in London. I have seen the tiger and his jama in the V&A, and of course the jama in the entry of the V&A textile storage says Mr. Tipu's dressing gown. And again, I mean, it's just appalling. It's just appalling. And because, okay, fine, if this happened in 1799, if in the 20 years even later or whatever, some old English lady who was donating this on behalf of whoever had got it across can say that, but I want to know what the V&A curators today, how can they justify not updating information that is in their archives? Forget the context. I mean, if you start about objects in the British Museum, they took temples apart. I mean, those are sacred spaces, and you sort of hack at them, and you bring pieces of them as booty and place them out of context behind glass, and you don't care what happened. What happened in the temple. I mean, it's just completely outrageous. But at least the least they can do is contextualize the labeling for people to get a better understanding. And Tipu's, it's very interesting because it's next to Ranjit Singh's throne. But what happened to Tipu's throne? And Saba's point about how they felt so threatened by these objects that maybe portrayed power. It was this octagonal, right? 8-sided throne, and it had 8 finials of tiger heads. And that was the first thing they broke. Yeah. They only have evidence from one illustration of that intact, because he never posed for any portraits sitting on his throne. But again, I think it's in Henrietta's account that I had read just an excerpt of, where she's offered one of the finials by the guy who's taken it apart, because other than being made of wood, it was also and the gold finials, the sides of that divan, like the sides, they had gold foil on them. Yeah. So they even peeled those up, and those were being distributed to the minor troops, of course. So, we don't know what lies today in Powys Castle, which is where Tipu's tent lies. okay? Because there was never any questions asked, and yes, Clive was disgraced and eventually he killed himself and what have you. But nobody, forget the museums, nobody's holding Powys Castle accountable for what they have still, because they are hesitant to sell. And I was in London 5 years ago. I think this was in 2014 that one of the finials actually came up to auction in Bonhams.
Okay.
And again, it's like, oh my God, and their catalog is not going to say where the finial is coming from. Hum aur aap kuch bechne jayein to what's the provenance? What's the provenance? I mean, okay, nobody's bought this, and that's what enraged me about the glasses as well. When because really, they well. Then I discovered that that the present owner of those glasses is actually an Indian collector.
Okay.
Yes, and it is in India. And then there was this whole campaign by so many people, so many curators in India as well. And we were all kind of going on social media saying they should stay in India if they are in India. I mean, why do you want? Because again, what is going to happen? What has happened to a large majority of the Mughal jewelry? It now lies in Kuwait and Qatar because they have the money. People in desperation sold at various times, and when the Indian government was nationalizing things, and actually the glasses never auctioned. They never sold. They are still lying with the original owner. They were withdrawn, as they said. And really, I think, so with Saba's take on it was so interesting to me, because she's kind of obfuscating the lush green sort of view of maybe the conqueror's view, which is how they would be presented. Oh, the mighty Mughal was sitting with these on, how cool. But she kind of obfuscates the clarity of the lens, and she's illustrated pain. She's illustrated pain, which also serves, I think, as clarity. So when she said that the museum in Oxford wanted to display it, and it was displayed there during her thesis in Oxford, I thought that was just amazing. And I said, well, one day when the V&A gets its act together, maybe they should. you can put they can go there, provided it has the right text next to it.
Right text. But there's another bit of history in my making of these glasses. I was interested in embedding in them images of photographs taken by Margaret White Brooke. Brooke White. All of you have seen those images in the partition images. It's a very, the Life magazine has this really popular image of an old black and white image of an old man carrying an old amma on his shoulders, and then there's one of family members holding a stick, a rod, with a person involved holding it. So every year in August, those images come out from India and Pakistan, and they keep showing them. So I was interested in putting those images in the glasses, because I knew that's immediate recognition कि oh yes, Saba partition की बात कर रही है. But it became a month-long battle to get the licensing permission to actually use those images, because I began to trace that who owns the rights, because Margaret Brooke White is of course long dead, and she was she was in India and Pakistan, the border, documenting, because she had the privilege. She could helicopter in the safety of her wherever, neutrality, whatever, with her big equipment, and she took these pictures and then she was helicoptered out. So how many people actually had that then? But now, do we have any access to these images? We can only use them for very limited purposes. So I started to trace that who owns the rights to these images. My immediate thing was Pakistan, right? Because it's our suffering, it was our horror. I mean, this image has become beyond. It's not possible that anyone, apart from Pakistanis and Indians, can own this image. But then I realized, no, this image is represented by Scala. I chased them. They said, no, you need to approach the estate of Margaret Brooke White. I emailed them. They said, actually, these particular images are Life magazine. I got in touch with them. They said, no, you need to get into Getty's.
Oh, gosh.
And then I was like, great. And then I approached Getty's, and I live in Dubai, so I can't even be like, do a war from Pakistan and hide. I'm in Dubai, they are in Dubai, they'll come and knock on my door if I use an image without permission. So I wrote to them and I asked them for permission, and they said, Ki, this is the contract.
Oh God.
You can use it if you, for a book cover, this is the 800, 700 dirhams or whatever was the cost. You cannot, you can't reproduce this. The object that you make, you cannot sell it. You will not own the full rights to that artwork that you make. But you can use this image for this one particular time. In other words, it meant like, no, right? It's limiting my freedom to make my artwork based on that. So my professor suggested, you know what, just use it. It's okay, because you are layering it with green, so it's changing the image enough to become yours. But in the process of me researching and writing those 50, 60 emails that I wrote to all these different licensing houses, I came across a really interesting blog. And I love blogs because there's all these like really interesting information people put. Like, Reddit. Do you ever use Reddit? It's like the best, right? Like you get the truest picture of
Everything.
Everything. It's the truth. It's the truest fact. Okay. So I came across. Sorry, I lost my trail of thought.
You were on Reddit, you were
I was on the blog, and I read someone's entry, and they said that Margaret, when she was taking these pictures, she made the refugees walk back many times and walk again, and walk back and walk again till she got the right composition. Now I want to ask you that how many times do we go to the north, we get the best shot, but then we'll see a bakri running left, or we'll see a half hand in it.
That's the best part.
This is not a time where we had Photoshop, right? So for her to get the image right, and they're not allowed to Photoshop even now, they can get fired for that. At that time was to have a retake. And I want you to imagine that how scary it must have been for the refugees who are crossing. And this strong white woman with all her powerful gear is standing there, and we've just gotten independence a day before, and we don't know what's going to happen. There's no Instagram.
And a lot of us don't know where that line is.
We don't know the line. We don't know कि हम Pakistan में हैं, India में हैं. So I really was in a way glad that I didn't get permission to use them, and I felt कि maybe this was meant to be. That I was not looking at this partition from her lens anymore. Yeah.
Oh, that's so powerful. I'm so glad that happened, that you didn't get rights to that. That's very traumatic almost. I think this makes me think about the narrative, and we're coming back to the idea of Orientalism, how they kind of view us as not human. They can use our story, they can kind of like capitalize on it, and then I think they've also made us question our own, again, the idea of identity, big time. हम कौन हैं? हम किससे लड़ रहे हैं?
Who's the enemy?
Who's the enemy? I teach in a village where students ask me, why do we celebrate 1947, 14th August? क्या था इसमें? And I realized that separation from the partition for them has not happened. हमें भी नहीं पता in our schools, growing up in relatively privileged backgrounds and all of that, we're not told that independence is separate from the partition. And I think you're 65, if you see this piece, India is celebrating the ceasefire, but victory. Pakistan is celebrating what they think is a victory. We've been taught it's a victory. We were told that it was propagated by India, but the reality is far from it. So why is it that we're constantly being fed a narrative and we're being handicapped and not allowed to kind of find out who we are and what actually happened? 1100 years, we all lived together until the partition happened, right? Culture fused in. It was not Hindu, Musliman.
No.
Our ancestors grew up with neighbors who were from all religions, and these were not the only religions. There were so many more.
So many.
So I mean, your pieces really speak it. Even the Muhammad bin Qasim.
I'd love to talk about the Muhammad bin Qasim piece. The piece on and I think I'm glad that I'm sitting here so I can actually use my short arms to wave around. But the drawing on the left side, in the left hall, which is on your right, is a large pencil drawing, and my medium is all pencil. It's a large pencil drawing which has two soldiers on the right, clearly very Muslim looking, like one look very Arab looking. It's Muhammad bin Qasim. Another very popular figure in our imagination of the Pakistanis, outlook. And the other is right next to him is Alexander the Macedonian, which I hold back from calling the Great. He did invade Multan. And on the left side is Raja Dahir, who
Was the ruler of Sindh.
was the ruler of Sindh that Muhammad bin Qasim defeated and killed. And on the top is King Porus, who Alexander fought and defeated, was defeated by.
Yeah.
Right. And this battle took place in near Jhelum with Alexander, but it was against the backdrop of Sindh, which was a very, very rich
Yes.
space at that time. Multan was called the frontier of gold. It was like, it had a very big sun temple, which was like the Makkah for the Hindus. So the pilgrims would come from far and wide to this sun temple to see and just shower it with gold, as is their tradition. So it was a huge revenue for that region, and it was a very, very rich temple. And Multan was a very rich city.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a lot of trade that happened from Multan all the way to Baku.
Yeah, Central Asia.
Because if any of you have been to Baku, there is Ichari Shahar, which is called Ichari as an inner city. And it's interesting, and makes me think that we have Ichra, you know? And I wonder if Ichra has any connection with Ichari, because Ichari means inner in Azari language.
Yep.
And in Ichari Shahar, they have a Purana Mohalla. वहाँ पे they have a caravan sarai called the Multan Caravan Sarai.
Oh, gosh.
And what is the other one? It is the what is the city in Uzbekistan?
Tashkent.
Bukhara Caravan Sarai. So when I went there, I was like, why does it say Multan Caravan Sarai? And no one could give me a clear answer कि Multan Caravan Sarai क्यों है ये? Caravan Sarai is like an inn, you know, where travelers stop and get fed, etc. and feed their horses, whatever. Then I realized that there was a amazing trade route from Multan all the way to Baku that used to take place in the 13th century. And ye jagah Multan ki was extremely lucrative, rich. A lot of business families used to take, and there was a lot of trade happening. And then when Muhammad bin Qasim attacked Multan, now we're backtracking to 8th century, 711, when he invaded Sindh. So this entire story is narrated in the Chachnama. We must be familiar with the Chachnama. It's the origin narrative of how the Arabs came into the subcontinent. Okay, so a lot of our politicians refer to the Chachnama, even Muslim League, even earlier at the time of partition, saying that Muhammad bin Qasim was the first Pakistani because he came and he purified the land of the infidels. Because
That's Ziaul Haq's narrative.
That was Ziaul Haq's narrative कि he came and he purified the land. उस वक्त कौन rule कर रहा था? उस वक्त कौन inhabitants के religion क्या था तब? Can anyone guess? In Sindh?
It was Hindu, I believe. No?
They were Buddhists. They were Buddhists. They were all
Right.
Buddhists.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yes.
they were Buddhists, and their king was Hindu.
Yeah.
And so the narrative goes that Muhammad bin Qasim came to rescue a Muslim woman because she said, "Koi hai jo meri madad ko aaye," and Hajjaj bin Yusuf said, "Labbaik."
Yes.
And hence Muhammad bin Qasim was sent, and he saved her. He killed the king. He occupied the land and ruled for many years. Now, हमारी identity Arab कैसे बन गई? Is my question, based on that invasion. So I've juxtaposed Muhammad bin Qasim with Alexander. They were both invaders.
Yes.
And who are we then? Who are they fighting? हम कहाँ के लोग हैं? हमारी history क्या है? हम किसकी मिट्टी के हैं? Are we the people of Indus? Who were we prior to 1947? What happened after 1947? Did we stop? Did we suddenly become Arabs?
No.
You know? So these are the questions that I want to raise through my practice.
I think we should end it there. This idea of, I think my take home is definitely erasure of memory, deliberate narratives, and then kind of exploring who we are. And your work does that so beautifully. And I think at this point there are a lot of questions in my mind, but I want to open the floor, because I know it is getting late, to all of you, and I really hope you all do